morning, Amador County, and welcome to Love, Hope, and Faith. I'm Heather Murdock, and I'm so happy you joined me today, and I have a wonderful show. And today's the day before Thanksgiving, and I hope you have a lot to be thankful for this year. And I really wanted to focus on gratitude because it is that season. And, gratitude, I've just found that when I'm thankful for all the blessings in my life, even in the stormy times, my relationship with God is so much better and deeper and richer. And, there's the verse in the Bible that talks about the peace of God that transcends understanding, that passes all understanding. And what does that really mean, and how do you get that peace? And I have conversations with friends at church and people that maybe aren't believers who talk about that with wonderment, like, how can you have peace when everything is falling apart? And the answer to that is Jesus. And I have found personally in my relationship with him that the more thankful I can be and the more I look for the blessings, the more I feel that peace. And there's a great scripture that's from Psalms, and I have my little Bible on my phone this morning, and it says, it's from Psalms 107, "Give thanks to the Lord because he is good. His faithful love continues forever." And he is good, and he just blessed my life so richly. And I'm not talking materially, I'm talking about just in my heart and in the blessings that just come with having a relationship with him. And I've shared my testimony on the show a number of times in different ways, and I've been through some hard things, and I know you've been through some hard things, and I just want to say that I would not change one thing. I would not change one thing in my life if it didn't mean that I wasn't where I am right now. And that is something to be thankful for. I'm just so grateful for my relationship with God. I'm so grateful for the lessons that he teaches me and the way he uses my circumstances to minister to me, to teach me, to grow me, and to bless me with just relationships and family and friends and just opportunities to especially the show. I'm grateful for the show that I have the opportunity to witness about Jesus and to share the stories of the people that God brings to be my guests. Just amazing stories of hope, and I always say that no matter where you've been, there is hope, and that hope is in Jesus. And today I have a wonderful guest, wonderful story, and this is really something special because my guest Carol, she is telling her story publicly for the first time, and it's a family story of what appears to be on the outside family devastation and pain, but it's been used for good through God's grace. And I'm going to just introduce Carol Cherry right here. Hi,
Hello,
Carol.
good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good.
It's so good to have you.
Thank you.
It was a great way that I was introduced to you. Lori Halverson contacted Sue and said, Heather's got to have Carol on her show. She has an amazing story. And I ran into you on the set here last week, or 2 weeks ago maybe, and you shared a little bit with me, and I just knew, yes, your story needs to be told.
Yeah, it's a good story.
It's your family story, and I want you to start off. Tell us.
Well, my story is about my grandfather. My grandfather was a multiple murderer, and it was in Oklahoma, and he was an alcoholic, and he had a bad temper and was quite abusive. And he ended up getting drunk. He was married to my grandmother. They had 2 children, my father and his younger sister, Louise. And then they had divorced. He had remarried, and she was pregnant. And one day he got drunk, and he was with his new wife, and she tried to stop him from drinking, and he got violent and ended up killing her. And then he got in his car, and she had a friend there, so he got in the car and took the friend with him over to Jinx, Oklahoma, where my grandmother lived. And she had a restaurant that she ran, and they had an apartment in the back where she and my dad and my aunt lived. And they heard him making noise out in the back, and they didn't answer the door because they were very afraid. And he went around to the front and broke the window with his gun. And my grandmother and my dad had walked out to see what was happening and try to calm things down. And he shot my grandmother. My father...
How old was your dad?
My dad was 14 at the time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. so he witnessed the whole thing. He saw his dad, saw him break the glass, and they had called for help many times, so many times that night he was screaming for help and nobody came.
Now, your grandfather was Native American, right?
No, he wasn't.
Okay. Okay. Why did I think that?
I have no idea.
Okay. So
my mother was, but
okay,
my dad
okay.
wasn't.
Maybe that was it. Okay. And
Yeah.
so, as I was going to ask what tribe that he was from, but okay, that doesn't really matter, I
No.
guess. So your father witnessed the whole thing.
Yes.
Was calling for help. So, I mean, your dad he could have been killed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he certainly could have, and I think he knew that. So he took his sister, and they left the place and hid. In the meantime, my grandfather went down the street to where his mother ran a hotel, and the marshal called because they'd gotten a call of a Mrs. Frey being dead. Then they got another call that another Mrs. Frey was dead. And so my grandfather went to the hotel, and the marshal came, and the deputies. He shot the marshal, and they wounded him. They thought they had wounded him gravely, but he survived. He was apparently quite the character.
Wow.
Through all this, my dad was watching the newspapers and the trial and realized his father probably would be set free. And that was just more than he could deal with.
How could he be set free?
Just the way the trial was going. There were circumstances they were trying to bring up.
Wow.
And, of course, things that happened then would not even be allowed now.
Right.
One of them being, my father hitchhiked into Tulsa one night and found the judge's house and knocked on the judge's door. They let him in, and he told what he had witnessed that night. The judge put him on the stand the next day. And he testified. And it was just an amazing story because they asked him, "Is the man who killed your mother in the courtroom?" And he said, "Yes, she is. Yes, he is." And they said, "Which man is it?" And he says, "It's that man right over there." He didn't refer to him as his father. He was so angry.
Yes. Yes.
So at that point, my father was put out on the street. His grandmother she had been taking care of him, and she didn't want him there anymore. So she put him out on the street to fend for himself. And he actually lived in the jailer, let him stay in the jail to sleep until they could find a family to come and get him. And he did go with family. My dad was devastated, as you can imagine. Well, the point of the trial was when his testimony was what condemned his father to the electric chair.
Wow.
So he's 14 years old and holding tremendous pressure and guilt over what had occurred.
Because, I mean, even though you see something horrendous like that, that's still your parent, your father.
Absolutely, yeah.
And there's something intrinsic in us that we love our parents.
Yes.
And that can't be denied. So even though he shouldn't feel guilty, I would imagine that's a natural feeling, even through this.
Yeah. Oh, yes, I'm sure it was. Well, the thing is, my dad never told my sister nor I. It was a closely guarded secret within the family. So I found out this story quite by accident when I was in my 30s. My parents were still living. And I had a cousin that called me and said, "Did you ever hear the story about the family member?" And she started telling me this story. I had never met her before. And I said, "Oh, my goodness, I think you're talking about my grandfather."
Wow. Wow.
So I called my father, and then he opened up and told us everything. So he ended up, but the hope of the story starts here.
Yes.
He lived with his step-aunt and uncle, and it was a very difficult environment because he was really a ranch hand. They decided to come to California, and he elected to stay back there. And he couldn't survive except by his own volition. So he lived in a shack on a ranch, and he would work for ranchers in the area until he could make enough money. Then he would go to school till the money ran out and the food. Then he'd go back to work, and he did this until he graduated from high school.
Wow.
Then he ended up going to, after he graduated from high school, the attorney for the Osage Indians came to him, and his name was George Labadie, and my dad did not know him until this point in time. And Mr. Labadie said, "I know all about you, I know about your family, and I know what you've been through." and I want to send you to any college that you want to go to.
God bless him.
It was a remarkable time.
Oh my gosh.
But it was the Depression, and my father chose a local college, but he went to college and graduated, and then he went to work at a city service pipeline company, an oil company back there. And he worked there for 42 years. In the meantime, he met my mother. After they were married, he was in a store one day, in a grocery store, and he turned the corner, and this lady looked at him, and she said, "Is your name Frank?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "I'm your sister."
Wow.
Because they had been separated for all those years. The family did not want her around him.
Wow. Wow. So the family took her in, but no one took your grandpa.
And she was sent to
your dad in.
California.
Okay.
To live.
Wow.
To keep them separated.
Wow, that's an amazing story, and I know there's more to it. And we have to take a break in just a few seconds. So I want to kind of stop you there, but it's just a story that you read about in books, and I know you have some pictures.
I do.
Yeah. So when we come back, we're gonna share those pictures too,
Great.
because it's great to see the face with the story.
Yeah.
You know. So. Wow, I hope you've been enjoying this story, and there's so much more to share, and it's just amazing that, Scripture says all things work together for good for those who love God.
Right.
And this kind of story, you think, where's the good? But there is good in it.
Yes.
And how it's impacted you and what you've done with it as a result,
Yeah.
And how it's moved you to help others. Yeah, so it's awesome. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back.
You're watching your local television network, TSPN, and now back to Love, Hope, and Faith with Heather Murdock.
Welcome back to Love, Hope, and Faith. And if you're just tuning in, Carol Cherry has been sharing an amazing family story about your grandfather murdering your grandmother,
Right.
and his new wife, who was also pregnant with their child. Back in what year was this?
This was in 1928.
Okay, yeah. So the Depression, during the time of the
Right.
Depression, and back in Oklahoma. And we're going to show pictures. Go ahead and show the picture of your grandfather first, and hold it up to the camera there. So, and you can see the headline there says "Carnage." Carnage because there was a triple homicide, and then he also shot the sheriff, but the sheriff did not die.
Right.
And your grandfather went to the electric chair.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
he
And
did.
they show the picture of your dad, the one who
This-
witnessed the whole thing, your father, when he was 14 years old. So
This is my father, and this was this was his high school graduation, so this was about 4 years after.
wow.
the
And
event.
I was studying that picture to look into his eyes,
Yes.
and he does have something in his eyes.
He does, and he always did.
Yeah. So you were talking off camera about the shame that your father had. Tell me more about that.
Well, he didn't want my sister and me to know anything about this because he really felt that we would believe that the family was mentally ill, which, lots of people are. This was a different era.
Yes.
And there was a stigma then
Mhm.
that simply isn't there anymore.
Exactly. Yes. These things weren't talked about. These
No.
things didn't happen very often.
And,
Yeah.
and he was, my grandfather was an alcoholic. And what occurred was simply due to the insidious causes of alcohol.
Mhm. Because he was, which surprised me, you said he was a deacon in the church.
Yes.
But I'm not naive enough to think that just because someone's a deacon or serving in a ministry means that they don't have issues.
Right.
He just hid his, and it sounds like hid them beneath
Right.
the religion, but they were there, and the alcohol made them come out
You're right.
demonically.
Right.
Yes.
And his reputation in prison was of a person with no remorse.
And how long was he on death row before he was?
He was on about 2 years.
Okay.
During that whole time, my great-grandmother lobbied for him to be released.
Oh wow, she did.
Yes, and as an insanity plea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And his case is still being used today.
Really? Wow.
Frey versus State of Oklahoma. And yes, it's being used today in defense and insanity pleas.
Wow. But it didn't work.
No, it did not.
The insanity plea didn't work in this case. Good.
Nor
That's
should
a
it
precedence.
have.
Yes, nor should it have. So then this benefactor, this angel, comes
Yes.
into your father's life when your dad's just graduated high school.
Right.
And says, he was a wealthy man, and said, I want to send you to college because he knew the story.
Yes.
What a blessing. So
He
did you ever
was.
get to, is that man still alive?
No, he isn't alive.
Okay.
My sister met him.
Okay.
When she was in high school, before she knew anything about this story, she was in a home economics class, and this man had a beautiful home outside of Bartlesville, which is where I was from. And her class went out to view this beautiful Osage Indian home. And Mr. Labadie said, "Are you Frank Frey's daughter?" And she said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Your father is a very special man." And the part of the reason he felt that way is he gave my father the money to go to college. My father worked diligently to pay that money back. And before we had a car, when I was very young, my dad got a ride out to Mr. Labadie's home and repaid him every penny.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm not. And Mr. Labadie was stunned. He said, "I didn't expect this." And he repaid him with interest. He said, "Mr. Labadie, times were tough, and I know you were suffering too. And I feel this is the least I can do for what you did for me."
Oh my gosh, that makes me... Wow.
So my dad met my mother, and his hope really started then. She was a Christian, and they went to church, and my dad became a Christian through this time.
Yes.
And he became a deacon in the church and never drank.
Do you think that your dad, I wonder how I don't know if you probably didn't have this conversation since you found out. Did you find this out after your father passed away?
No, it was before.
How did your father reconcile God after what he went through? What do you think about
grace.
that? Yeah.
Through grace. And I don't know if my dad was ever able to, quote, forgive his father. He adored his mother.
Oh, yeah.
And there was so much abuse going on. But he realized the frailty of the human spirit and how God can lift you above that. And I think that's what carried him forward.
Do you know how he became a Christian?
I think just through my mother and through going to church. Because she was...
I feel like God really placed beside your dad a godly woman who could lead him there.
Oh, yes. So much. And they
because I see God's provision throughout this whole story.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I don't know if the viewer, and because I have people who watch the show that are Christians, and they'll see this, and then the non-believer who will say this is a horrible story, and why would God allow these types of things? But what I see is God's provision and grace and His plan working all things together for good.
Yeah. And first Jeremiah 29:11. "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you.
Yes.
Plan to give you hope and a future." And that, to me, was
amazing.
the story of my father's life.
Yes. So what did your father go to college for?
He took business classes and got a degree in business and ended up going to work at a hot dog stand. And the personnel director of city service used to come in there for lunch and asked my dad one day, "Why are you working in here?" He said, "Why don't you come over and talk to me?" And my dad worked at that company for 42 years.
Wow. Back then, there was a lot of company loyalty. You get with one good company and stay there for 40 years.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they were wonderful. He became an expert in the tariffs of the pipeline industry, and just a remarkable man.
Wow.
But through all this, he still suffered.
Yeah, what kind of father was he to you? Was he emotionally available? Because something like that might shut you down.
This is always the hard part of this story. My dad, there was an edge that my dad had with me, and I never knew why. I mean, he loved me, but he was very abrupt and more with me than with my sister, and it was always a mystery until I saw the picture of my grandfather.
You look like your grandfather, yes.
And then I recognized, and actually at my dad's funeral, his aunt came over to me and said, "You look so much like your grandfather." And it was just all clicked for me at that point.
No, I've heard this before. Where there's been family tragedy, and one member of the family, a child, looks like the one causing the tragedy, and they kind of get the short end.
But I didn't ever feel not loved. So, and my mother was a good balance for my father. And my father was very strict because of what had occurred.
Yes. Protective, I would imagine.
Yes,
very protective.
Extreme.
So your mom probably compensated and was very the loving, doting mom.
She was.
And they had a good marriage?
Oh, wonderful marriage. Yes, they both died quite young. She was 62 and he was 66.
So when you found out the story, did you call your dad right away?
I did.
And what did you say? What was that conversation like? Because he'd been hiding this all this time.
I called him and said, "I just got the most interesting call from Aunt Deb, a granddaughter, Nancy." And he said, and what did she say? And I said, she was telling me about the story about the skeleton in the closet part of the family. And he said, and what did she tell you? And I told him, and he said, I just didn't want you all to be burdened with that for your lives. And I said, it's okay. It's no problem.
Yeah.
But after that, my sister and I went back to see my dad, and he took us around and showed us every place where all these things had occurred.
Wow.
And he sat in front of the restaurant where the murder took place, and he cried. But it was good that he could open up finally and share his life with us.
Yes. I think that's a blessing. I mean, he didn't want you to have that burden, but then he was burdened because, when we keep things hidden, they remain dark. But when we share them, the light is able to come in, I think. Don't you think?
Yes, I do. In fact, he didn't even tell his very best friends.
Yeah. Yeah.
He told about a month before he died, and we didn't even know he was sick. He took his best friend out to visit his father's grave. That was the first time he'd been out there ever in all these years.
Wow.
And that's when his best friend was told the story. So, and then later on, many years later, my husband and I were in the Bay Area, and my husband worked in real estate for a short time. And he had sold a house for these people, and they'd moved back to Tulsa. And they invited us back to visit them. So we went back there, and it turned out that the neighbor across the street from her had known and gone to high school with my father.
Oh my gosh.
It was just an amazing story.
Connections. Wow.
And she was so excited to meet me, to find out how my father's the rest of his life had gone.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't forget a story like that.
No.
Yeah, wow. So you were raised in a Christian home,
Yes.
and I know, because I should have said earlier, you're a pastor's wife,
Yes.
and you lead ministry yourself in Fiddletown at the Fiddletown Community Church, right? Okay, so you were raised in this home, and your dad was a deacon and all that, your mom was a Christian. So when did God become real for you personally?
Well, I was baptized. I became a Christian as a child, and was baptized by a wonderful man, Dr. Harold Graves. He left our church and became president of Golden Gate Seminary.
Oh, wow.
And we had he made my faith real.
Just in the way that he
just
did the
presented it
sermons
the right way. But as so many teenagers do, I left that for many years, and went to college, married, and started a very tumultuous life for about 15 years.
So why do you think that you left the church?
I don't know.
Did you feel like it was too regulated, too many rules, too unrelatable? What was it that you think that
I just think I remember I was raised in a very, very strict family.
Yeah, so you rebelled against the strictness,
I think
maybe.
I did.
Yeah.
And that was not a good thing.
Yeah.
To say the least.
So for 15 years you were out in the world.
I went to church. I still went to church.
Oh, you did? Okay.
But I still had too much fun.
Yeah, you were a believer, not a follower.
Right. That's right. That's a good difference.
What's the one that says be a fan, not a follower? Or no, be a follower, not a fan. Yeah, a fan is like, yeah, Jesus is good, but a follower really follows his word and his call and all that. Yeah. Okay, so I want to hear more about that, because I think people will relate to that. I love this show because I get to share how people, their stories, and that's what our story is so powerful, to share with others. It's great. You're doing good.
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
You're watching Amador County's local television network, TSPN. You're watching your local television network, TSPN, and now back to Love, Hope, and Faith with Heather Murdock.
Back with Love, Hope, and Faith. And Carol was just sharing the story about how you became a Christian in the moment that Jesus became real for you.
Right.
And when was that?
As a child, but he became very real to me. But then later on in life, I married, divorced, remarried, and that was a marriage that was not directed by the Lord. And there were many things that happened. That husband, after I married him, I realized he was an alcoholic.
Okay.
And during that time, I found that he had molested my children.
You're kidding, Carol.
And how I know that is I heard a noise and walked in and saw it one night.
Oh.
So the outcome of that was I had one thing to draw on, and that was God. That was the Lord. It lifted me up and carried me forward. After I found out, I lost all of my hair in 2 weeks from stress. So.
And how old were your children?
They were 3, 5, and 9.
And had this been going on for a long time?
It had been going on. I had no idea until that moment. And my son was not molested, but my daughters were, even at age 3. So that was just a dark, dark time of my life. And so I just didn't know what to do. I started that moment trying to figure out where I was going. You know, we all have a life story, and we have to decide how we want that story to read.
Yes.
And that was a deciding factor. So after I went to the doctor, and they gave me injections trying to stimulate hair growth, and it was just such a difficult time. And at the end of a year, they said, there's nothing more we can do, that your hair is not going to grow back. And I got in the car that day, and I said, okay, Lord, I give it to you. And I really gave it to him. There's giving it to him, giving it up in words, and really giving it up. And that was the day I turned it over. And that's the day my faith started to grow. That's the day I realized that this story of mine had to be well seated in what God wanted for me, not how I was just determined to lead my own life and be rebellious.
Yes. It's so hard. What you're speaking of now is one of the hardest things for people to do.
Yes.
Is to give their will and their decisions in their life fully to the Lord.
Yeah.
And you may make that decision and then the very next minute take it back. It's
right.
a give and take. It's a give it, take it back, give it, take it back. But when you do surrender like that, and you had no choice but to surrender.
Right. And it took a burden off of me. And I'm telling you, at that moment, it was like God started opening doors for me.
Yes. I've experienced that in my life.
It was amazing. I just could hardly believe what was happening. It was like every day. Prior to that, every day, things were happening that usually would happen to somebody, maybe one of those once in a lifetime. My house was flooded, 2 feet of water all over my house. Just many different things. My husband was in a car wreck because he was drunk. It was just so many things, devastating things were happening until that moment. And then it was like God is saying, okay, now let's get on with the show.
Yes. Yes. And so your husband, I don't know if you want to even go further into that story, but was he held accountable?
No, he wasn't.
Okay.
And that was because of me, because I was so afraid of losing my children.
Okay.
So I divorced him. That was how I handled it. He was a loving man to me, but he had a problem with alcohol, and it was too bad. He has since passed away. During that time, I was raising his children and my children, so we had 6 children, and it was and I was working, and it was a very difficult, very difficult time.
How I mean, I know we don't have time or even permission to explore all your kids' stories. It's their own stories, but how'd they do through all that, just overall?
They were okay because I was a very sheltering mother.
Right, because you were so sheltered, and then this happened, and you becoming more protective.
Right, but their problems manifested later on in life, and they've been able to deal with them. And 2 of my children are Christians, and I believe one is almost there.
Yeah, praise God. That's good. He redeems.
Yes.
You know, I don't know if I told you this before, but I've shared on the show before. I'm heavily involved with the Celebrate Recovery Ministry.
Yes.
And you know, and it's wonderful for alcoholism and drug addiction and food addictions. Any addictions, it's a great place to find healing through Jesus. But it's also great for people who have been just hurt,
Yes.
whether it's molestation, whether it's abuse, whether it's divorce, grief, whatever it is. It's a great recovery ministry for us to just sort through all the baggage, you know, and to help drop it and to use Jesus as that tool and to let him heal us and redeem us. You know, it's a wonderful ministry.
It is. And I was involved with Al-Anon for many years.
Yeah, that's a good one, too.
And it really saved me
Mm-hmm.
because I was able to see much more clearly after that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You know, because our perceptions and our vision gets distorted based on the abuse and based
Right.
on what's happened to us. And to be able to see clearly, like I always compare my life back then to looking through a shattered windshield. My perceptions were totally shattered, or, you know, maybe not shattered, but very distorted because of my experiences.
Uh-huh.
And as a result of my relationship with Jesus, I'm looking through a clear windshield. I can see clearly through him, you know.
Yeah.
So it's awesome.
Yeah, it is.
It's awesome. So you, let's kind of move forward,
Right.
continue to move forward. You are involved in a program called CASA.
Right.
Okay.
Court-appointed special advocate for children.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I did this. I started when my kids were grown. I really started reflecting on what my father had gone through, and if he'd had any support system at all, life. I don't know how it would have changed him. Probably made him a happier person,
Mm-hmm.
maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But I decided I really wanted to give some support to children that had problems.
Mm-hmm.
So I first started going to the orphanages in Romania. Every summer I would spend over there working. And that was right after Ceausescu was overthrown, and I went over there, and things were very grim. And everything you've ever heard about the orphanages was absolutely true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I worked in the state-run orphanages. And I just felt like these children could barely understand anything. I learned a few words in Romanian, but they knew that I loved them. And
Mm-hmm.
we sang little children church songs, Sunday school songs to the children, and played with them. And I just felt like if I could give one child hope,
Yes.
that was really my goal. I always felt like you couldn't save everybody,
Mm-hmm.
but God would plant it in one of those children's hearts to have hope.
Yes.
And I really felt that we maybe were able to do that. I will tell you, though, those people gave me much more than I could ever receive, or give them, I should say,
Yes.
because they had nothing but faith.
Yes.
And when you operate with nothing, you have no food, you have no income, you have no way of getting that, and no government resources, you have to rely on faith in God.
Mm-hmm.
And they did, and they showed me a faith that I had never seen before, a depth of faith.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite a wonderful experience. So I came back here, and after we moved up here, I thought I was teaching Sunday school.
Because at this point, if you just say you've been married a couple times before it, but you married your husband.
I married my husband,
and he's a pastor. Was he a
Yes.
pastor when you married him?
No, well, he had just left the ministry, and he'd been the minister for over 20 years.
Uh-huh.
But he had gone through a divorce and really didn't want to take the church through it.
Yeah.
So he separated himself, and I was determined never to marry again.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But God had a
You
different
had other
plan.
plans. That's right.
I was the great resistor, but finally I conceded.
Yeah. Good.
And he had a Promise Keepers. He was called back to the ministry.
I've heard that's a great experience. Is
Yes.
that for men?
Yes.
Promise Keepers. Yes. Okay.
And it was at the Elkland Stadium, where we had gone to many Raider games. And as he lovingly says, the difference between going to a Raider game and going to Promise Keepers is profound.
Yeah. Yes, I would imagine. Yes.
So we moved up here, and he was quite by accident. We found this church, and they asked him if he would come and speak at the church. And this was Spittletown Church. And so he said, sure. And so he did. And 2 weeks later, they asked him if he would be the pastor.
And how long has this been now?
17 years.
17 years.
Yeah.
Good. Is it a growing church? Or because Spittletown's such a remote area.
Well,
You know-
it's amazing how many people are over there. We have about between 60 and 80 people in our congregation.
Yeah, good.
Depending on whatever Sunday and whatever holidays
Yeah,
falling.
exactly. And is it active youth? Because I know you lead the youth
I have a
ministry.
small youth group. We have about 15 children in
Okay,
it.
good.
We've had up to 25.
Mhm.
I enjoy it thoroughly. I worked with some children who were adopted
Mhm.
and some children who were in foster care.
Mhm.
And that is partly what kind of jolted me to say, I can do more.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
So you went to Romania before you got involved in
Yes.
CASA? Okay. And so when you went to Romania and you realized, and you said your faith was so deepened by experiencing their faith,
Right.
when you came back, you decided you want to work more with children?
Mhm.
Okay. And so then it's interesting how you're working with children, knowing what your dad went through at 14.
Right.
And I feel like there's a
There was.
purpose there.
I really felt like it was a tribute to my dad to become involved with CASA
Mm-hmm.
because that was more closely aligned to his story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I've been doing that for a few years now, and boy, if you've ever wondered what to do with your time, that's a great place to be involved.
It's really interesting, Carol, because about, I don't know, it's probably been 6 years or so, I read an article in the paper about CASA. And I thought, because I've always, I used to want to be a child psychologist. And
Oh.
I really, just from my own childhood experiences, had a heart for kids. But I'll talk more about that in a minute. We actually have to take a break. The time goes by so fast. We'll be right back.
You're watching your local television network, TSPN, and now back to Love, Hope, and Faith with Heather Murdock.
Welcome back to Love, Hope, and Faith. And Carol, you were talking about the CASA program and how
Yes.
you feel led as a result of your family story to give back to kids and to offer kids hope. And I was sharing with you off camera, I wonder how your father would have gotten through without his faith in Jesus. It would have been a very different life story. Could have been
Completely.
for you. You could have had a very different life story.
Right.
So, and talk to me more about. Okay, you talked about Romania, and you talked about the CASA program. Talk to me about what it takes for someone to be able to be involved in something like CASA. Because I know what it was. I was going to share with you that about 6 years ago, I was reading an article in the paper, and they were promoting the CASA program, and I had wanted to work with kids and families, but I just, back then I wasn't with the Lord. And so now maybe I could do it. But before I thought, how could I possibly separate myself if there's kids that are abused? How could I separate from that and be objective and not just want to kidnap them and steal them away to protect them, you know? So
right.
how do you get through that?
I keep the objective of why I'm there is to give these kids hope,
Yes.
give them some direction,
Yes.
help them have a more balanced life. And as long as I stay there, I can separate myself. I know the ideal is for them to be with their biological families. These are kids in dependency court. And sometimes that doesn't happen. That's a heartbreak. But then we start working to give them balance about where they're going. Remember, this is part of their story.
Yes.
And you just always have to keep in mind, what do you want that story to look like? What do you want your part in that story to look like?
Are you able to legally pray with them and things like that?
I haven't, because I think there will be some possible resistance. I'm very careful how I approach that. As far as praying for them,
You can do that on your own.
Oh,
but
boy,
I mean,
do
yeah,
I.
of course. I'm sure many times a day.
before
Yeah.
every visit,
Yeah.
and before every court appearance, before anything I do, because I really want God's hand to be in this whole thing.
Yes, absolutely.
His hand's in it just because he put it in my heart to work there. I'm a volunteer.
But you want him alongside of you and
Oh,
inviting him
yes.
in and and giving him the glory too. In your own.
And I encourage the families, whether it be the foster families or the biological families, to involve their older kids in youth groups and in church, because it's a quality environment.
It is, yes, a safe environment.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I wanted to share with you right now. I read my Bible every morning with some of my friends. We all read the same book of the Bible together. We can talk about it and stuff. So right now we're reading Mark. And something that really struck me this weekend when I was reading it, the man with leprosy, and it's Mark 140. No, I'm sorry, 240. No, 140. And it says, a man with leprosy came to him, Jesus that is, and begged him on his knees, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Filled with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. Immediately, the leprosy left him and he was cured. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. See that you don't tell this to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for you, cleansing as a testimony to them. That part's not that's important, but the first part here, Jesus, filled with compassion, reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. And the reason I bring that story up is because I really related to that in my own life. I've shared on my show before that I've struggled with an eating disorder for many years as a result of childhood stuff. And I don't know if you know that much about how eating disorders come to be, but it's very similar to lots of other addictions and about trying to control the chaos in our lives. And I had that experience, and I had the experience that when I let Jesus into my life, Carol, I had an immediate deliverance. I know you believe in immediate healings. I absolutely, and if you would have asked me years ago when I wasn't a believer, I would have laughed and thought, that's ridiculous, that those things don't happen. But I know I know, and that's all that matters. I know what he's done for me. And the fact that Jesus has compassion, it says filled with compassion. And when you said earlier, the reason I wanted to bring this up is you said when your children we found out they were being molested, and you were at the end of yourself.
Right.
And you just fully surrendered.
I did.
There's nowhere else to go.
There was.
And that's what this man, he's a man with leprosy. There's nowhere for them to go. They're separated from society. They're outcasts. They're done, basically. Yeah. And if you're willing, you can make me clean. He believed. He knew that Jesus could make him clean. You knew the same thing.
I did.
And Jesus had compassion.
And he lifts our burdens if we just ask him to take them.
Yeah.
Whatever burden, he can do anything. And that's what you just have to remember is that there are no limits. We have limits. With Jesus, there are no limits.
Exactly. What I'm hearing in your story is that he's so much bigger than any circumstance. And these are some big circumstances you've been sharing with us today. Some big tragedy, but God's bigger.
Oh, yeah. And I know the story that I've been telling today isn't that unusual in today's society.
Yeah.
There are many people who are experiencing this. I always like to just close my eyes and put my arm out and ask Jesus to touch my hand.
Yes.
Because I really feel that he does. I've seen he has shown himself to me in some profound ways through my life.
Absolutely.
And the other thing about that is I am so honored that he cares enough about me to reach out and touch me.
Yes.
And take care of me. And there's no doubt. There is absolutely no doubt that has happened in my life.
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that he has, sometimes I'll pray and I'll say, Jesus, there's people who are really suffering in this world, who are starving, who are, disease, grieving, just beyond my imagination. And yet, I have this prayer request, and he answers prayer. And when he does, it just blows my mind. I don't know why I continue to be blown away. Well, he's already shown me who he is, but I just still get shocked that he, like you said, cares so deeply for each one of us.
He does. And I really encourage, when I teach my kids at youth group and Sunday school, I really encourage them to listen for Jesus.
And how do you teach them to do that?
I just tell them, you just have to absorb yourself and realize that he is here with you. He's guiding every step. If you want to have a really good life, then just listen and follow.
Yes.
Because the Bible tells us how to be, and then Jesus gives us every capability to be. He can take a bad thing and make it into a good thing.
What Satan means to use for evil,
Right.
God uses for good.
That's right.
Yes, yes. And and I love that. And obedience, you just hit the nail on the head. I think, what I was hearing from you is obedience. Follow is obedient,
Right.
obeying.
Yeah.
And obeying is where the true peace is, when you obey, because that's being his perfect will.
And it's simple.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's not a complicated thing.
Yeah.
We know what we're supposed to do and not do.
Let me ask you a personal question, going back a little bit. Have you been able to forgive your husband that hurt your children?
Yes. That's difficult. I went to counseling, and the first thing that was said to me was, well, if Jesus can forgive, you should be able to forgive. And it was too new. I actually stood up and walked out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I understand.
Because it was just too fresh and too hurtful. Since that time, I realized that he was in an alcoholic blackout.
Mm-hmm.
He had absolutely, to the day he died, had no recollection.
Wow.
But that doesn't mean it didn't happen, because
Right.
I witnessed it.
Yes, and your kids live with it.
And
Mm-hmm.
my kids are still living with it. And but I realized that if I needed to forgive, to purge that anger out of my own life.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I did.
Yeah, we forgive for ourselves.
Yes.
Honestly, I feel like, forgiveness, hopefully it helps them too, but forgiveness really sets us free.
Well, and I
You know?
can't be an example to others
Yeah,
if I have no forgiveness.
exactly. And it's also, again, about obeying. God commands us to forgive.
Right, that's right.
And only he can help us forgive, because I've had a situation in my life where my sister, she was killed by a drunk driver, and
Oh.
I've shared the story before, and God provided me the opportunity to forgive and call the person who was involved in that, and I was able to do that. And I'm telling you, Carol, I couldn't have done it without the power of the Holy Spirit
Oh,
helping me.
my.
I was terrified to make the call, but it changed my life.
I can imagine.
changed my life.
Goodness.
So, I know the power of forgiveness.
Mhm.
I want to read Jesus Calling today, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. November 21st. Thank me throughout this day for my presence and my peace. These are gifts of supernatural proportions. Ever since the resurrection, I have comforted my followers with these messages. Peace be with you, and I am with you always. Listen as I offer you my peace and presence in full measure. The best way to receive these glorious gifts is to thank me for them. It is impossible to spend too much time thanking and praising me. I created you first and foremost to glorify me. Thanksgiving and praise put you in proper relationship with me, opening the way for my riches to flow into you. As you thank me for my presence and peace, you appropriate my richest gifts. Amen.
That's great. Amen.
And what I see in your life, Carol, is that you have made your life is about thanking him and glorifying him.
It is. I would never deny my Christ.
Yes, absolutely. He's done so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is so much.
Right.
So before we go, we have just 2 more minutes here. Okay, good. So how has having a relationship with Jesus changed your life? I mean, just to sum it all up.
Well, it has just given me hope and faith when life gets bleak and dark, and it does for Christians as well as non-Christians.
Yes, absolutely.
I have by my side the maker of all creation.
Yes.
And that's just beyond what more could you ever dream of having in life?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And it carried me, lifted me, and carried me along. It's given me hope, as the verse says, hope in a future.
Yes. Hope beyond, and peace beyond your understanding.
Right.
You can't
Totally.
describe it.
That's right. You really can't.
Mm-hmm.
And he lifts my burdens daily. He just carries me along and makes life rich.
Yes. Just like it says in there.
It's true.
And I love the Jesus Calling when I read it. It's always on target with what we've talked about in the show. It's just,
Yeah.
that's how
It's
God works.
amazing.
I know. I love it. It's just amazing. It's so amazing. And you've been a wonderful guest, and I've
Thank
enjoyed
you.
meeting you
Well, it's
so much.
been a great pleasure to be able to share this story
Yes.
I never thought I would have the opportunity.
I know, and I hope it blesses people. I know it will.
I hope it does.
Because like you said, these types of things were uncommon then, but they're so common now. You read in the
Right.
paper, it's all over the place. And even as a believer in Jesus, I think, oh my Lord, how are these people going to survive this?
But they can.
But they can through him.
Yes.
And I always end up praying for him. Even though I don't know him, I pray for the people I read about in the headlines.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So anyway, Carol, thank you so much. And I hope that you guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and we'll see you next week.
You're watching Amador County's local television network, TSPN.